Welcome to the CSI podcast on 3D printing, and I'm delighted here to have Mark Chester, Product Development Specialist from the Centre of Digital Innovation, and Carl Diver, who is a Professor in Innovative Manufacturing. Thank you both for making the time to come in today.
Delighted to be here.
And I would like to start with, we hear about 3D printing so much in the news, we hear about it all the time. What does it actually mean? What is 3D printing?
We refer to 3D printing as taking different feedstock and basically producing a 3D object in a layer by layer approach. There is a wide range of different technologies out there across filaments, resins, and powders. We focus on both on polymers and metals, but we can do other substrates as well. But it's the idea of taking something from a 3D model and basically turning it into reality through different processes, whether it be material extrusion or stereophotography, resin-based printing, or powder-based printing as well. There's a whole kind of thing to sort of dig in there, but essentially, it's that idea of being able to take something on from your screen and put it in front of you. Using a machine of varying levels of different costs, essentially.
I think we said, most people refer to it as 3D printing, but there are times where it's referred to as additive manufacturing as well. And I think it's that bit of that idea of adding material compared to traditional processes that are termed subtractive machining, where you start with a large block and you remove everything till you've got your final part. So that idea of nearly from a sustainability point of view of just using the materials you need to build what you want as your final product. So there's that element as well from a sustainability point of view that's really important.
And then what that also means as well in terms of when we look at 3D printing in comparison to traditional methods of manufacturing as well is there are benefits and strengths and weaknesses between the two. So when it comes to 3D printing, we don't require molds to be created. We can basically make things without molds, which means a reduced lead time. We can also make things that can't be made in other ways of manufacturing. So we can make things with really complex geometries as well. But the other thing as well is what we can do is, because we don't need molds, we can basically 3D print in different locations. So if you have a 3D printer in Australia or in China or
Ireland,
you can, if you've got the right 3D printer and the right material, then you can potentially 3D print in different locations and not have the same shipping costs that is associated potentially with other methods of manufacturing as well.
So you've got this collaborative approach to creating a product anywhere.
Essentially, yeah.
Providing you've got the technology to make that.
And you've got the right quality assurance across some different locations and the right sort of setup as well. So there's not too much deviation between the quality of the parts that you're producing.
Without compromising any confidentiality, do you have any examples of how you've seen this process kind of play out?
Yeah, there's a project we did with a company called Vivo Bear Food. There's something called Knowledge Transfer Partnerships that's been funded by Innovate UK, which is part of the government funding, and it's been running for close to 50 years. So, and the idea is that companies get funding to hire a recent graduate. The graduate works in the company but is employed by the university, and they get support from the university. The projects run for 2 or 3 years, and the idea is to try and get technology out of a university and embedded in the company. So we recently worked with a company called Vivo Bear Food, and they're a wonderful company, again, from a sustainability point of view. They're B Corp certified, which, for anyone in that community is, Patagonia is another example of a company that's B Corp certified. So the ethos of the company is great. They want for people to kind of get back to the way nature intended their feet to be. So, the shoes flare out at the front so that your toes aren't kind of cramped up inside a shoe. And the sole tends to be quite minimal, so 2 or 3 millimeters thick. So you start to feel the ground through your feet, and there are other benefits that through that as well, from your posture and different elements of that. But they really want to get away from all of the waste that you see in the fashion sector, and only producing the shoes that are required for the individual. So this concept of scanning a foot and 3D printing a shoe to meet that individual's dimensions and things like that. And everyone's feet are different. They're even your left and right foot is different in that sense. But the project was very much then looking at, could they 3D print a shoe in one piece rather than having, was it something like 36 pieces that go into assembling a normal shoe. And we were looking at kind of supply chain issues within that as well, of where are the shoes manufactured traditionally, how do you get them around the world, to this concept of scan your food, upload that file, it's 3D printed then somewhere locally to that final customer, and only shipped that the final mile, if you want to call it that. But and that's a concept really that's still in development, but they've launched the prototype of that. So it was great to be involved in that project from a supply chain point of view. There's another German company that's doing something similar. Is it Worth, I think, that's doing something on that, where kind of ordering spare parts, and they then globally have printers based in different locations. So you order your spare part, they'll identify where you are, and then whichever hub is nearby, locally, they'll print it locally and then just ship that final bit. So it's that idea of nearly a digital inventory in a way, isn't it? So yeah.
So when we talk about sustainable development goals and sustainability for businesses, I mean, there's definite commercial benefits to printing locally, or even having the resources around you accessible. How do small businesses kind of take that, who haven't ventured into the world of 3D printing? What steps could they take, or should they be thinking?
I mean, Mark deals with SMEs every day in Print City or facility, don't you? So
yeah, I think in the first instance, you need to look at what volumes you're looking to produce. So if you're a small company looking to get into 3D printing can't necessarily match quantities in terms of mass production. So if we look at something like an injection molding machine, for example, the cycle time for a part might be less than 30 seconds per part. And so you're able to really churn out quite a lot of parts quite quickly. 3D printing, in that sense, when you look at producing that part in terms of actually 3D printing something, it can be quite slow, because realistically it's not going to take 30 seconds to produce a part. It might take a couple of hours or longer, depending. And so the scalability there can be quite difficult. So I think the main question that we get in at Print City is, why do you want to, not why do you want to 3D print, but is additive manufacturing or 3D printing the right technology for you in the first instance? So looking at things like, does 3D printing add added benefit in terms of, like Carl was saying, part consolidation? Does it fit within the sort of right quantities? And then, or is it a sustainability element like you were referring to as well? So I think the first instance is, when companies come into us, it's a bigger piece around the education, and we will tell companies when it's right not to 3D print something as well, and just to stick with a different manufacturing method rather than just 3D printing everything, because actually sometimes there isn't use cases for it. And then a company might become disenchanted with the technology and then might adopt it in the wrong way, and then that kind of sets them back further. So I think in that first instance is just explore the problem and really focus on what the company's challenge is, and then go from there. I think if there's not necessarily a problem, or a company doesn't necessarily come with the problem, then it's sometimes 3D printing can be seen as a little bit more gimmicky, and so we're just producing something by a 3D print just because they can say it's been 3D printed and it's novel, innovative sort of technology, that's not what we want to. What's not what we want to do.
I mean, probably haven't really touched on the facility, Print City, in that sense yet, but it was established about 6 years ago, and the idea was to bring printers that were spread out across the university together in one place with dedicated staff who only work on 3D print and not who dabble a bit. We've grown now to 86 printers. The staff have increased. We're supporting undergraduate teaching, postgraduate teaching. We've got our master's program on digital design and manufacturing. A lot of the work that Mark's doing with some of the other colleagues has been supporting SMEs in the region, but also nationally and internationally around innovation, exploring the technology. But what we find when they come in, it's, we don't sit them down and just give a presentation. We tend to bring them around the suite of printers that we have. There's display cabinets everywhere around, different products and projects that we've worked on. And as they go around that kind of tour of the facility, there's usually some point where they go, I hadn't thought that this is what I can do with the technology. And that's the bit where the light bulb moment comes up, where actually we've had this problem last week, or we have this problem with.
It's a mindset, I'd say. That's probably the most challenging thing when companies come in, is that mindset around manufacturing, production, etc. So, people might come in thinking that they want to produce their end product using 3D printing, and you can absolutely do that. But there's use cases where that works very nicely, and sometimes where it doesn't. But then you might just use 3D printing as a jig tool or fixture to produce your end component and make it more efficient to be able to produce your end component using your more traditional methods of manufacturing, just in more an efficient way as well.
So using it as part of the design process to help collaboration and working out what might be needed further down the line?
Yeah, when we think of it in a rapid prototyping sense, so when we think of it in a trying to go up the TRL levels, or trying to develop a product further, definitely. But
TRL, or just for our audience?
Technology readiness levels. But essentially also aiding other manufacturing methods as well. So like for example, if you were welding something, and you had a very complex weld that you were looking to do and needed some way of clamping the pieces together, you could 3D print the different jigs or fixtures to hold that together and then make that more efficient, so that you can reduce the amount of time to produce your products in that sense. So there's but also if you're thinking from a production side of things as well. So if you're working on a assembly line, an assembly line, and a part went down on your assembly line, then a part, you might need to replace that part to then get the assembly line back up. So there's less inefficiencies in your own assembly line as well. So I think, like I say, it's that mindset really around where you are with your product and exactly what you wanted to do, and I think that's where we can kind of come in and help, and hopefully help those companies have them sort of brainwaves.
Some of the key things we're trying to do is support them in that journey, in a way, if you can use the word journey, but it's that bit of giving companies the tools and the know-how and the knowledge and the workflows, so that if they do go out to buy their own equipment, that they're asking the right questions, they're then getting the right piece of equipment to bring into their companies. And there's been examples where companies who have come in and then adopted the technology and brought that on site, but it's making sure that the wraparound support is there and that they know how to use it. So again, Mark's worked with some of the companies where they've then bought the equipment, but bringing some of their staff in, or you go on site, make sure that even just helping them get it out of the box on day one and just work them through so that it's up and running, and it's not that scary box.
Nice segue into my next question, which was about the adoption, right? So you're educating a potential audience to try and establish where the need is, and once that need is established, you're now talking about helping them adopt 3D printing, what some may feel is really technical and there might be an element of inertia there. You're helping them through every stage of that process.
Pretty much, yeah. So, a company might come in. We might do that education in the first instance. We then might work with the company to do a sort of feasibility study in which we, prove the concept of what they're looking to do with some of the equipment internally. We'll look at a piece where, we'll do a piece of work around whether or not the technology is right to bring in-house, or whether or not it doesn't make any sense and to go to a contract manufacturer. If the company does choose to bring it in-house, then we have a fantastic array of different suppliers and companies in the UK that can provide. And then, we will try and do as much as we can within reason to really kind of help that implementation. It pains us to see pieces of technology, whether it be 3D scanners or 3D printers or whatnot, that have just dust on them when they're on the shelf because no one's necessarily knows how to use them, or the person that knew how to use them has left the company. We will try and do that piece around, we almost want them to kind of go away from the university, go away from Print City and have all the skills that they need to be self-sufficient. So then maybe in maybe months or a year's time, they come back to us and then want to develop the next thing and advance even further. So,
didn't you at some point put out a call to some of the companies you were engaging with to bring in some of the printers that they may have bought in the past that they were struggling with as well? And
yeah, absolutely. So the technology has become a lot cheaper. So to the point when one day I was in one of the local supermarkets and saw one in the middle aisle. I won't say which one, but so
we know the middle aisles.
Yeah,
we'll get sucked in.
But it's becoming so accessible to the point now that companies can just put a 3D printer on the company credit card. So that's a good thing in one sense, but then that also means that if companies are accessing that technology and then become disenchanted with it, then things happen like Carl was saying there, that the printer might break or might not be maintained properly because they haven't had maybe the right education on it or the right training on it. And then, there's just technology there that's sort of wasted potential in the company. So we had workshops where companies could bring in a printer and we helped to kind of diagnose maybe what the problem was or if it was something to do with the hardware or the software, and then kind of keep them progressing on their journey.
I think there's a bit there around just, universities sometimes might be, scary places, or might be a reluctance to go in, or that, maybe my idea isn't groundbreaking enough, and we're trying to get away from that. And, our doors are open. Please come in and engage with us. And, this past weekend, we hosted a 3D printing festival at the university in the Manchester Met Business School for the Sanjay Mortimer Foundation. And it was all about bringing the community together. So, that bit about democratizing it and making it accessible. These were users from all over the world, actually. I mean, speaking to, some, young students who flew in from Germany, and, there was, some people there from the US and Australia. But it was about the community and enthusiasts coming together, and really low-cost printers and kids, but also adults and pensioners, the whole range. But it wasn't about selling stuff. It was about sharing information. And, so I think that part of the community as well, and it all just builds up depending on what level you're at, all the way through to the industrial side. I think for us, it's that bit of, we've got the education programs. If we can get the young people excited and interested, then there's a bit of a pathway through. We're creating the talent pipeline then with the skills to for industry then to come and either bring them on placements or employ them afterwards. And it's about maintaining that contact with them and that community in that way.
And are you seeing a demand in employers wanting those kind of skills in-house?
Definitely. So our students are really in demand now. So, quite a lot in automotive, and I won't go through, but some of the automotive sports and stuff.
Those you can share.
Yeah, but we're seeing quite a lot of our alumni or previous students who've come through our master's program, working for some of the leading companies, and there's a demand there to bring those students through, and it's across a range of different sectors as well, and that's the other bit of 3D printing. It's not just one sector. So it can be automotive, it can be fashion. So, and something I probably can mention is, 2 weeks ago, a few of us went to Germany to visit some machine suppliers, but also end users. So we were on BMW's additive campus. So it's really seeing how they're operating, the challenges that they have, but also what drives the technology, through to a visit to Siemens and their experience center in Nuremberg, and finished with a visit to Adidas. And so very different sectors in one sense, and drivers, whether it's the aesthetics and how things look to more the functionality. So in our, I suppose, role of, serving the companies either in the region or nationally, it's trying to understand all of those needs and making sure we've got equipment that can address those needs. And so there's a challenge of having the right equipment in place to be able to give the right support and knowledge to that wide range of companies that might come to us.
I mean, you mentioned some very big brands and organizations there, and that knowledge and insight can then cascade down towards the smaller businesses. So
well, they need it in their supply chain.
Yeah.
So if those large companies have a demand and they're looking for products designed in that way, then the entire supply chain, and then that's an opportunity for Greater Manchester and the number of SMEs that we have operating in manufacturing, but also in a wide range of sectors. And that's where I think the regional funding that's coming through, and we've just secured 5 million in funding to establish the Advanced Materials and Manufacturing Innovation Centre. Through investment zone funding for the region. But that is a program now for 4 years that will allow companies to come to us to continue getting support from Mark and others in the team in Prince City around, exploring the technology, product development, doing more fundamental research as well into what are the materials, how can we really push this technology, but for the benefit of the region to try and attract companies to the region, because there is a real strength across all the universities, here in Salford, University of Manchester, I'm mentioning them all in that sense. But we've got a strong ecosystem with strengths in advanced materials and manufacturing. The region, the industrial revolution kind of heritage in the region. We want these large companies to come here to engage with all of the SMEs in the region, that they're able to supply into those. So I'm really excited about the next 3 or 4 years in that sense. But and it's that call to the companies out there: just come and knock on the door, and poke the technology and play around with it, and we want to support as much as we can.
I mean, I know you've got companies coming in, and it's great for like show and tell, and get people playing around with equipment that would maybe cost prohibitive to begin with, without the insight and knowledge. As part of kind of do you get into the companies themselves, and obviously by invitation, but just going in and helping staff see the benefits without overwhelming them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely a two-way thing. Sometimes it can, with different companies, it can be a challenge to help them see where the different applications fit. We have gone to a few different companies and walked the line, as it were, the assembly line, to kind of get a real understanding of what their needs and requirements are. Absolutely. I think it's very important, as much as they need to get into our mindset, we need to get into their mindset as well. And I think some of the ways in which the technology has been adopted and been kind of pushed 3D printing within our industry has been very much around going to companies and saying, oh, you can 3D print, like you should 3D print your product instead, or you should try and do it in this way. And that's not how we shouldn't be trying to force people to do it. We should, like I said, we should be looking at, okay, well, what are your current challenges? What is your challenge on a day-to-day basis, and how can this technology potentially benefit you in that sense?
Absolutely, because you mentioned if one small component in a manufacturing line goes down or wears out and you need to replace it, and the lead time for that is days, if not weeks, that's a significant hit to the business.
And if you can invest in relatively low cost now as well on a printer on site, you might be able to get something printed in a few hours or half a day, get that on the production line, keep you running until maybe the part you need arrives 2 days later or something, keep you going. Or but then as people, I suppose, invest in better technology on 3D printing, something actually more robust that doesn't need that spare part coming in at all.
Wait, Mark, you mentioned earlier, sorry, I'm just jumping in here because you mentioned earlier that the different types of materials that you can print in, right? So when we see the news reports, it's often usually just about plastics, and that's the kind of shot that you get. But you mentioned powder, metals. That's really quite interesting.
Yeah, so there is a whole world of different materials out there that have different strengths and weaknesses. Within 3D printing, there is quite a lot of different companies making open source platforms that you can kind of experiment with lots of different technologies, with lots of different materials, which is can be a plus and a negative dependent. I think polymers get a bad rap, to be honest. Plastic, especially at the moment, with microplastics and that sort of thing, plastic is seen as a terrible substance. Plastic is extremely versatile as a material, and the fact that you can, done in the right way, some of the 3D printing technologies that we're looking at, you can, reprocess the different materials and re-put it through a 3D printer. So some of the projects that we've done at Print City and at Manchester Metropolitan University is looking at different feedstocks from different supply chains and then putting it through 3D printing technologies. So example was we took plastic waste from milk bottles and dashboards from ABS dashboards from car interiors and repurposed that as filament for 3D printing. But then in another sense, we also looked at concrete printing and looked at how we can take demolition waste from one of our own feedstocks was from a building that we demolished on site, which was our own building, and then repurpose that as a replacement for virgin sand in mortar mixes for mortar or concrete 3D printing. So there's a whole world of things in there that you can really sort of break down into. And
I think these two particular projects were run by Prof. Craig Banks, who's one of our colleagues and one of the founders of Print City. But I think it's that wider bit of bringing colleagues across the university into the space as well. So it's not just engineering. We have researchers from across the university accessing the space. So we're there as a resource. We've been talking a lot about supporting companies, but we're also supporting our academics across, whether it's on the medicine side and architecture, materials that react differently under, external conditions and loadings, metamaterials. It's just so exciting every day, the different academics who come in and go, could you do this, or can we try this? So it's a wonderful place to work in that sense, and that we've got the external companies on the commercial side coming in and going, and we've got the people coming in with the blue sky ideas. We've got the students coming in, exploring and trying to push the boundaries, and the printing onto textiles, and garments then ending up in London Fashion Week on catwalks. And I never thought I'd be discussing fashion because it's clearly not my forte. But it is every day. There's something new and wonderful. And even today, I just bumped into some interior designers who were making small models to go inside a building that replicated one of the buildings at the centre of Manchester. So there's always something just interesting going on in the space.
So before we wrap up then, in terms of your kind of two questions, one is where, you're talking about the fact, fashion industry and so forth, where have you seen 3D printing being used in a way that you just, it almost was a proud dad moment, kind of thought, wow, that's really incredible that you hadn't foreseen, but it just happened. And then the final question is for our SMEs, because at Centre of Sustainable Innovation, we're working with SMEs of all sizes at different stages of growth. And just thinking about, well, who might be thinking, what do I need to do next? So just where have you seen it happen and work that got you excited?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that got me mostly excited, but also the wider 3D printing community is after the pandemic, after COVID, there was such a requirement to make PPE during COVID, during that time. And the fact is that we didn't necessarily have, all the people, well, the hospitals didn't have all the PPE that was required. And the fact that, the 3D printing community kind of came together and started producing, visors and other bits of, other tools required, really kind of highlighted what can be done with 3D printing technology in terms of, quite a resilient supply chain, being able to turn things around really quite quickly, and showcasing, that all different people across the UK, across the world can be able to do this, but also quite quickly as well. So, there's a resin, my company, they make direct light projection technology, but they're basically a resin-based system that made, I think it was not a million. No, they about million.
Biggest order, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, they made a ridiculous amount of PPE visors over COVID because they refined the technology to a point where they were able to look at how quickly they can produce this part. And really got it down to an exact science. So I think for me that really highlights that, and we should really take that learning from that period of time that happened a fair decent while back now, and really kind of move forward with that.
Sorry, I was jumping ahead to one of the other subsequent orders they got then, but one of the biggest commercial orders ever for 3D printing. But for me personally, I think one of the most interesting things or biggest impact is around kind of prosthetics for kids and stuff like that as well, where there's a company creating prosthetics that just didn't look like the traditional. It was kind of like an Iron Man arm or something, and just takes the stigma away from having to have a prosthetic. So it's that personalization or it's something like that
can have a profound impact on the individual.
It's that possibility of then the child being able to choose what that looks like, and being able to have different prosthetics that they can use in different days, and so it's things like that make it accessible as well, because any other way would have potentially you'd be looking at injection molding and the cost of molds, and so it would be prohibitive. But by accessing 3D printing in that way, so it's things like that probably have the biggest impact.
That's lovely to hear. Actually, those two examples and the impact that it can have on us humans, but also commercially was beneficial to the organisation as well. Final question then: small business owner sitting there listening to this, thinking, well, hopefully have a different view of a wider view now, an understanding of 3D printing, what can they do next if they want to venture into that space?
I think it's so accessible now in one sense for most companies. So like Mark said earlier, with the credit card, you can have a machine for under close between £600 and £1,000. Delivered the next day and fairly straightforward to get running. So there'd be an element of going down that route, but I think get the bit of advice from an organization like ourselves as well in that sense. But it's fairly easy to the barrier to entry is really low now, and you can still get relatively good quality at that price. I don't know whether
Yeah, all I'd say is simplify what you're looking to do. I think the biggest wins that we have when we start engaging with a company or an SME, is start small. Look at something that can be a quick win, whether it's be people in higher management needs see a return on investment. Start with them small wins. So it might be a small part that you might only need 20 or 30 of, but solves a problem. Then you can learn about that whole ecosystem. So we can 3D printing is one side of it, but also the 3D modeling is the other side of it. So start with something simple, something basic, and then grow from that. So once you have been through the process of creating something and printing it, you will then start to see different avenues to explore and go down, and from there it should be a lot sort of an easier journey, I would say.
Just if I may, even we were talking about Raw Water the other day about again worked with us and then invested in a printer, but there was an added benefit of saving 180,000 kilograms of CO2 within 4 months because they were sealing pipes using 3D printing molds, but the gases that were leaking out are quite toxic in that sense. So within that 4-month period, they were able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through doing that. And that alone is a huge justification to engaging and investing in the technology.
I think the final thing I'd probably like to say, and Carl alluded to it earlier, is innovation can be big or small. If it's an SME, they might think that it's not hugely innovative because they're not saving the world, but actually it's a big step in their own organization. So we don't care as a university, and the companies that may be listening shouldn't necessarily care. If it's innovative to them, then we'll take it 100% seriously, and actually small incremental steps can really kind of be really transformational in the long term. So like I say, maybe start small but think big, and I think you'll get there.
And don't underestimate the impact that any one organization can have.
Absolutely.
And hire our graduates. We'll have plenty more coming through this year.
Yeah, so do we, mate. Well, no, Mark, Carl, thank you so much for your time today, talking to us about 3D printing. I know our listeners from the Centre of Sustainable Innovation will really value this. But thank you for taking the time and sharing your insights, knowledge, and some examples as well.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Yeah.
Pleasure.